Who is the first black final girl? This is truly a question with no answer, because there hasn't been one. Not once in the history of slasher films dating back over 80 years. There have been characters that have come close, and some interesting films to point out, but in terms of a single individual to point to, they D and E. Before getting started, we should establish what exactly a final girl is, as there is a fair amount of confusion in online discourse. The term originated in an article by Carol Clover, entitled Her Body Himself, Gender in the Slasher Film, which discussed the formulaic nature of the subgenre and tropes regarding traditional gender roles and the subversions that were inherent in slashers. Her focus was specifically on American slasher films from approximately 1974 until 1987, when it was published. A revised version would later appear in Men, Women, and Chainsaws, a book expanding on the concept released in 1992. The final girl is the sole survivor of a group of people, typically teens, who are terrorized by a slasher villain, but she eventually turns the tables on the aggressor, able to overcome them in some way. There are two primary versions of the ending, one where the final girl kills the antagonist, and one where she is saved by an external force, typically a man. Sometimes one or more of her friends will survive, albeit heavily injured, but she's generally the last one left standing. Other common characteristics of the final girl include being chaste and pure, abstaining from sex or drugs, and generally with ambitions, and more focus on intellectual pursuits than her friends. Frequently, she will have a shared history with the killer, either via sins of the past, where a historical event has consequences in the present, or often by familial relation. At Halloween, Laurie is revealed to be Michael Myers' sisters, at least in some continuities. There are hundreds of examples of final girls throughout the years. The most famous are from the largest slasher franchises. Laurie previously mentioned, Nancy from A Nightmare on Elm Street, Sydney from Scream, Sally from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Alice from Friday the 13th. They are all white, conventionally attractive, young women. In the world of slashers in general, there is a lack of diversity. That has changed in the last 10 or so years, but during the most populous years of the genre, people of color were only allowed as side characters and minimized. There is the trope that the black guy always dies first, and while statistically that's not true, it highlights the bigger problem that there weren't simply any black characters. The most common archetype is the black best friend to the final girl, who dies sometime around the middle of the film in order to up the stakes and make things personal. Here we are examining a very specific archetype, a single character in the horror genre, which is known for killing off most of its cast in the average film. The final girl is not simply a woman who survives to the end of a horror film, but someone playing out a script that has happened thousands of times before, one life in a tapestry of infinite possibilities that intersect a dozen different times. With that in mind, let's take a look at a top 10 black final girls list from Collider. The first entry is Santa from Alien vs. Predator. While it could certainly be argued the first Alien film is a sci-fi slasher, most would class it as a creature feature. Alien vs. Predator, however, is an action film with some horror dressing, and she does not qualify. The next is Jasmine from The Sound of Violence, where she is a villain protagonist, but against not a slasher. The rest of the list continues like that. Not a single film is a slasher, although one of them does bear talking about. Sugar Hill from the titular film. It's erroneously listed as releasing in 1994, when it was 2 decades earlier, but given the rest of the list, this error is practically expected. The film is one of the earliest examples of blaxploitation, a genre of exploitation films that would largely feature black casts and target audiences. Sugar Hill was one of the first examples to incorporate supernatural elements into a more grounded setting. The story is basically a gender-bent version of The Crow, where after her boyfriend is killed, Sugar goes to a zombie priestess and enlists her help to get revenge. While the film is entertaining and notable for being one of the first films with a black woman as a horror protagonist, it still doesn't fit the criteria. There are other films worth discussing. In I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, a mainstream slasher, Carla, the roommate and friend of the protagonist, manages to survive being attacked by the killer, and presumably lives a long life. Still, there is no arguing she is the final girl, but at least she makes it out of the film alive. In several lists and discussions, characters from Jordan Peele's films have come up, specifically M from Nope and Lupita Nyong'o's character from Us. These are both central characters and make it to the end of the film, but neither film is a slasher, and thus neither is a final girl. Peele's films have brought the spotlight on a number of important issues, especially the treatment of black people in America, and are excellent, but they still aren't relevant to this question. The recent Scream films have featured the brother and sister pairing of Mindy and Chad. They both had direct encounters with Ghostface and survived, regardless of how improbable surviving their wounds were. Mindy, however, is taking over Randy's role of the film geek who has meta-knowledge that is a staple of the series. She's also queer, but the lack of LGBT representation in slashers is a whole nother issue. Bodies, Bodies, Bodies is very close, as at the end of the film there are 2 survivors from the main cast, Bea and Sophie. However, while there are elements of a slasher film to it, and the first couple of acts are structured like that, the final twist at the end of the film turns it all on its head, and as such there is no final girl in the film. Closer still is Sweetheart, from 2019. It follows a young woman who turns up on a desert island and is forced to fend for herself with limited equipment. The first act is almost entirely about this, with some mysterious events happening. Then it's revealed that a humanoid sea monster lives in the surrounding ocean, and it begins to stalk her. It would be possible to reframe the film as a slasher, if she ended up with a few more survivors on the island who were slowly killed off, but as it stands it's a creature feature, and thus she is not a final girl. However, despite there being no films with a black final girl, other mediums have explored the idea. In the last few years there's been a resurgence in horror literature that conform to the slasher genre tropes. The Black Girl Survives in this one is a horror anthology from 2024 that features a number of different stories with black final girls. You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight discusses the topic openly, commenting about how when the police show up at the end of a slaughter, it doesn't look good for a black character. There's No Way I'd Die First is a parody of 80s slashers featuring a psycho clown and offers insights on the pressure put on black women. It's likely there are examples that I've missed. The point is that the trend has been noticed, and there are artists making efforts to change that. Representation is extremely important, and by having black characters constantly sidelined and killed, it demonstrates broader cultural ideas. The final girl embodies a number of positive traits. She is resourceful, intelligent, willful, and strong. Because films have been unwilling to put people of color in this role, it implies that they are not good enough, or that executives believe audiences wouldn't buy it. Horror films are often marketed towards young people, especially those in adolescence. These formative years have a huge influence on self-image, and not having that representation causes harm. It's about the expectations that are set out. For black women in horror, they are not supposed to take center stage, but instead be a stepping stone for a white woman to develop, to be the star. That's unacceptable in the modern era, and I sincerely hope it changes. That's all for today. Let me know what your thoughts are about this topic, and, as always, be well.